Sage.
E te manga o te whare tēnā koe. Kia koutou huri noa i te whare tēnā koutou katoa. Nā mihi o te wiki o te reo Māori, kia tātou katoa. Please do take a call on the primary sector estimates, and I'd like to talk about one of the things in vote lands that the Minister didn't talk about, and that is tenure review in the Crown pastoral leases of the South Island. There was 51 million spent on this last year, and there's 131 proposed for spending this year. We have in the Mackenzie Basin a collaborative group that the government set up which reached an agreement about over 100,000 hectares of the Mackenzie Basin needing protection because of its high landscape and biodiversity values. We've seen a major expansion of dairying and irrigation in the basin and a destruction of some of the major areas of the tussock grasslands and shrublands which give that basin its outstanding landscape character, which attract many of the tourists, which provide habitat for threatened species like the robust grasshopper for a lot of braided river birds, and yet this government, through vote lands and through tenure review, is failing to ensure that we are protecting areas of the Mackenzie Basin, particularly on the basin floor, despite all the parties having come together and highlighted the need for this. We have seen tenure review on properties like the Wolds, where virtually all of the pastoral lease is proposed for privatisation and freeholding, and this is despite the provisions in the Crown Pastoral Lands Act, which provide for land of significant inherent values to be returned and to full Crown ownership and management by the Department of Conservation. So once again, in terms of the way the government is allocating funding, despite 131 million being provided in this vote for tenure review, that is likely to be going to leaseholders to allow only small areas to be protected as conservation land. We have seen under this government increasing use of covenants rather than restoration to full Crown ownership and protection as conservation land. And it's really disappointing because we have seen tourism grow, overtaking dairying in the primary sector in terms of the export returns, and yet areas such as Mount Mary on the Wolds, which provide an outstanding area to view the Mackenzie Basin and a major area of both ecological significance, landscape importance and recreational value in terms of people being able to walk up to the summit of Mount Mary, being proposed for freeholding. So tenure review is failing to achieve the objectives of the Crown Pastoral Lands Act in terms of protecting areas of significant inherent value. And I'd also like to speak, Mr Chair, on what Vote Primary Industries and Food Safety is doing in terms of the area of irrigation. We had a previous speaker, the Chair of the Select Committee, talking about how the Crown Irrigation Investments, the Crown's irrigation company, is providing seed funding for some irrigation schemes. But we have a major portion of the vote, over $100 million, going to the Crown Irrigation Company as a major way of providing cash handouts to these irrigation schemes. And that is public money which has been taken from the sale of our energy companies and is now going into subsidising irrigation, allowing private sector interests such as the big irrigation companies and landholders to take a public asset, rivers, lakes, water from our aquifers, and effectively use that to privatise the benefits. They get the benefits of the increase in value when land is irrigated, and yet there is no resource rental to provide any return to the community. So the government is taking over $100 million for its irrigation company, instead of investing that money in much needed research into better understanding the whole basis of our primary production sector, understanding soils, understanding how climate change is going to affect our primary sector, understanding the distribution of pests. We need to understand our natural systems, which are the fundamental basis of our horticulture, primary production, fisheries, and all of those export sectors. Yet what do we have instead? the government failing to recognise that a healthy environment is the basis of a healthy economy and instead increasing... Mr Chair.
Eugenie Sage.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Instead, we have this massive spend on irrigation, and one of MPI's goals is to increase the number of hectares under irrigation by 220,000 hectares, and yet in the answers to Select Committee questions, we saw quite clearly that even though it's called Crown Irrigation Investments, this is not about getting a commercial return for the Crown. It is about handouts for irrigation. Because the MPI said, and I quote, "Crown Irrigation Investments Limited's focus is on investing in schemes that are expected to be commercially viable in the long term, but the initial shortfall in irrigator uptake makes it difficult to fully source finance from the capital markets." And MPI would not disclose the commercial return that the Crown Irrigation Investments Limited is expected to get. It said that that was commercially sensitive. So, Mr Chair, this is all about handouts. We've got the Crown potentially investing in schemes like Ruataniwha, which Trustpower and Ngāi Tahu in 2014 decided was too much of a financial risk, that they weren't going to get an adequate financial return, so they wouldn't invest. So all of the funding for these schemes is likely to come from the public purse through the Crown's irrigation company, and ACC is reportedly part of a consortium to also invest in the scheme, and the Hawke's Bay Regional Council through HBRIC is also being forced to stump up public money for the scheme, which can't attract adequate private sector investment. That is a nonsense, Mr Chair, that this public money is being put at risk in such a scheme, particularly because it will have a significant impact on water quality, affecting the Tukituki catchment, the estuary, coastal processes, and significantly increasing nutrient pollution. And one of the other interesting things that came back from MPI in response to Select Committee questions was that MPI does not take into account greenhouse gas emissions when it assesses applications for irrigation funding. And we've seen the Irrigation Acceleration Fund now rolled into Crown Irrigation Investments, no account of the impacts on our climate. And this is when agriculture accounts for 47% of climate emissions, and this is when, for a successful agricultural sector, we need a stable climate. We know that the risk of fires will increase as the climate warms. We know that pests will increase, their impact will spread, yet the government doesn't seem to be recognising the basis for a healthy sector. We need a healthy climate. So it doesn't even take greenhouse gas emissions into account. It doesn't take into account how these subsidies for irrigation are going to create climate pollution. We want a healthy primary sector. We want a stable climate to ensure that, and that is why the government's priorities are all wrong in terms of spending up large on irrigation, agricultural intensification, while failing to take account of the impacts on the climate. This government is letting countries like Ireland get a march on New Zealand through their Origin Green scheme. They have got thorough sustainability initiatives which all of their primary producers sign up to, which are accredited, which are audited, but instead this government's goal in the primary space is simply to double exports by 2025 without ensuring that we are protecting our 100% pure green brand, by ensuring that all of the industry looks at sustainability initiatives and that we invest in that rather than handouts for more irrigation, more climate pollution and more water pollution.
Mr Chair.